Awesome. Okay, so this will be a fun closing panel. The goal is to make it very interactive. So if people in the audience have questions or ideas, do not hesitate to raise your hands and ask. We have some quite interesting panelists here today. So we're going to do a little bit of like a round robin, and everyone's going to share their background. As a reminder, or for people who were not here for my talk, I'm Jonah Burian. I'm an investor at Blockchain Capital. We were the first ever blockchain venture firm and are actively deploying.
Cool, thanks. So my name is Bradley. I'm the node manager here in Berlin for the Foresight Institute. We just opened a new node in April. A couple of our nodies actually spoke earlier today. We had Charlie and Martin. But we offer three main things, basically. We offer compute. We're setting up about 50 GPUs here at the Cambridge Innovation Center near Gorlitzer Park. We offer grants, range from like 10 to 100K seed grants in 5 areas of frontier tech. And now we've also got physical R&D space, a co-working space. Yeah, I think that's enough for now.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dankrat. Was a long-time researcher at Ethereum, now researcher at Tempo, do all kinds of protocol, architecture, and research and design questions.
Hi, I'm Jonas. I'm a geek and also founder of Numtai, the consulting company around Nix. Recently, I did some work for Anthropic, so I got to see a bit inside the beast, and I'm also building this local OS right now.
Wait, Jonas, now we're all curious. You got to tell us a little bit more about what's the nature of the work with Anthropic.
I don't know how much I can say from the NDA.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so we have a mystery Anthropic guest. So maybe to kick things off, I think as a first question, a lot of people here are imagining that agents are going to be the next, call it billion blockchain users. And it's a very abstract claim, right? What does that actually mean? What do you think they're going to do? So maybe to start off, I'm curious if people can begin to theorize, like practically in 1 year, 2 years from now, what are going to be the use cases that agents are actually doing on chain? What's like the beachhead use cases? What are the beachhead use cases? Who wants to start?
I think right now what we're seeing is that agents pay for, essentially it's like pay for API access. Like one is you can pay directly to access those models. And I think like that, I guess like anyone who's used Cursor knows this, right? You can have a Cursor subscription and then it picks and chooses and you can pick and choose the models. I think that just makes a lot of sense, and agents can hand off stuff to other models, pay for it, and so on. So we can see all that happening. But then they want to access other APIs. They want to have access to maps. They want to have access to all kinds of stuff that's online, and that is now more and more gated behind some kind of captcha or something, and they can't get in. And so I think that will just be a natural use case for micropayments to get access to APIs at scale.
Do you mind if I just push your thinking on that a little bit? Mm-hmm. It's not like the rest of the payments world isn't eyes wide open to this. Obviously, anyone with an API, in theory, might want to distribute it to agents, and Visa and MasterCard and Stripe and all these guys who are similarly building payments infrastructure probably want that layer. So what makes the blockchain solution more correct for APIs?
Well, the obvious one is we can actually process micropayments. Now this is true. For 15 years we've been saying this, but you can now make 0.1 cent payments or something, and it actually makes sense. And I think currently at least I don't want maybe they'll figure this out, but right now they haven't figured out how to do that at scale. So I think that's one obvious thing that blockchains can provide.
I see. So the point is, if you're paying so little for data anyways on the order of sub cents, then it can't be there's a 25% transfer fee. It makes the math not work. So the point is that stablecoins, in theory, are more economical for API payments. Is the idea?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So does anybody else have any counter opinion or another thing? Okay, fine. So then I guess some agreement on a panel. So I'm curious then, for people here, do you think the current L1s and L2s are sufficient to actually handle this type of new load? Or do you think there needs to be a new architecture to handle it? Like, does today's infrastructure work, or do we need to rethink blockchain infrastructure to service this demand? I guess I'll pass it to you.
So I
again.
mean, I think it depends on the time scale. I think I mean, so like with MPP, we've already done some of this, right? We've integrated payment channels. So if you keep paying for the same service, you can do like payments literally for free, essentially, right? And so you can do micro payments. But I think in general, I would say like on a long time horizon, it's definitely quite likely that you want like something extremely cheap. I think like right now we're still seeing that actual blockchain usage is like still way below like what you can handle with reasonable ways of scaling that many chains have implemented.
I think I'll just jump in here. So my background or expertise is not in blockchain technology, though I am seeing a lot of people that are starting to work with it in the node, the researchers. I think I want to kind of bounce a question back here because I'd like to better understand, are we so certain that we need these technologies? Do we need crypto? Do we need blockchain? And how are we certain when it comes to like 5 years in the future of like what sovereign AI means and moving towards sovereign AI? I want to understand this as a grant provider in the space. I'd love to hear thoughts on, are you so certain that this is the direction we need to go? Are there other avenues? Are you completely sold that it's going to be micropayments on chain? Because I'm also seeing other people say we don't need it all entirely.
Well, I mean, it comes a little bit to the question, like what actually, like what do you call a blockchain, right? I think like, so you can always run like anything you can do in a blockchain, you can do on a centralized database as well, right? So this is clearly true. But the question is like, how much overhead do you really have for running it on a blockchain, right? So what does the blockchain give you? It gives you like, for example, interaction between different assets. That you can't easily do in a centralized database because now everyone has to agree on one database and we aren't very good at that unless it's a blockchain. So that's what the blockchain gives you. For example, with stablecoins, what having a blockchain can give you is you can have many different stable coins on it. And so, but like the other part of that question is like, okay, so like that's what you need the blockchain for. The other part is like, what does a blockchain cost you? And I would posit that it does not cost you very much because like if you want it really, really cheap, then you run like a Validium on top of like whatever chain you want to run and you can do that with like very, very little overhead.
Maybe just to shift gears, we're speaking a lot about payments and blockchain, but maybe I want to zoom out to talk about the broader AI question. So, I mean, a lot of people in this room are huge open source fans, I have to imagine. And there's this open question about whether there will continue to be open source models at the frontier, right? We saw for a while the distance between open source and closed source models compressing. Now it's really damn expensive to train a model. So will that continue? Will people still have the economic incentive to train open source models? So I'm curious, like zooming out or fast forwarding 5 years from now, do you think the gap between open source and closed source compresses, is wider? So maybe I'll start with you, Jonas.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the big questions that is happening right now is we consumed all of the data that we have on the internet in order to train the models. And so the next step is to actually source private data. And that's where frontier models have the advantage because they have the capital. So it looks like we might go back to the frontier taking the gap might widen over time.
I see. So your point is something along the lines of, at this point, even the open source models have all the data on the internet. So the only differentiator to get better is private data, which in theory only the labs have or might have unique access to, which means that the gap should widen, would be your thought?
I think so.
Dankrad or Bradley, you guys have a counter?
That's just one data point. Maybe there's some others.
I wish I could provide more data points on this, but I do have maybe, let's say, an armchair opinion. you might be right, but I also feel that moving forward, the data that's going to be the most important is going to be the data that's closest to the skin, closest to the person. I think there's a lot of new types of data that we could start to capture, what you might call like warm data on the kinds of experiences that matter to me, that matter to my community, to my neighborhood. And I think that if we were to find ways, potentially using like blockchain or like cryptographic, like ZK proofs and things like that, to be able to capture new forms of data that really matter to me, I don't need to have a frontier model to still have a close to frontier model or an open source model that's performing better for me because there's more information about me. And I'm kind of sharing this because I want to know if you push back on that or not.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And maybe it's actually the nature of models that's going to change. So one thing we're starting to see more and more is the smaller models are getting fine-tuned for specific use cases. And so it's not anymore a comparison of general model against general model. Is now we have this fracture of smaller, more detailed model just for specific use cases.
I remember years ago, I'm sure some of you remember this, I think OpenAI, this is back like ChatGPT, like 3 or 4 time, but I think it was a $1 million or $1 million grant to solve this problem of super alignment. Do you remember that moment? This was years ago. And they posted this really great article on this where they were saying, okay, we're going to see this problem very soon, this problem of super alignment, where the models are going to get much better than their operators. And that it actually, what they found in early testing is that when the model is substantially better than the operator, the model can only perform so well. The model's capping out, not because the model isn't getting smarter, but because the human interacting with it can only engage so well and can get so much value out of it. And I feel like so this, again, armchair opinion, but I think we're going to get to a point where the ROI, the return on having a more and more powerful frontier model for general use, maybe for some specific enterprise cases, let's not talk about that, but for the people in this room, I think a fine-tuned small model that's running locally, and again, I'm biased here because I'm building out a cluster here in Berlin and one in SF, but I think could far perform, or just like not outperform the frontier models, but perform way well enough, and I have the added benefit that it's all running in-house. I know it's open weights, with open training model, like everything. So, and I guess I'm sharing this more as this is the future I'd like to see. Oh, great, cool.
Bradley, are you able to serve closed source models or only open source models?
I think. Is Miron still here? Would you like to answer that question? This is our tech lead. Okay, sorry. I think at the moment we're focusing on open source models, but I think we can serve both as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Maybe as a separate question, I mean, a lot over the past week, obviously, there's a lot of things that changed. We saw what happened with Fable and that the access got restricted. And there's some people see it as perhaps a positive, where there's this zero-day machine that was created and really created a vulnerability, and it's a good thing it was blocked. Others see it as it hurts your sovereignty in some sense. Right? They're restricting your access to intelligence. And as a result, that might promote people to say, hey, I don't want to have the platform risk of using a closed source model. I want to start moving to open source models. So I'm curious, what do you think are going to be the biggest impacts of that decision on how people then subsequently interact with AI?
I mean, I think it just shows, and again, I mentioned this before, I still find it hard to imagine that we will run all our models locally, but I mean, I wish, it's not something that I'm against. I really wish we could, but I do think that it's basically a call that we need to understand that we need, a multitude of providers, and we need to have alternatives. I think I hope that people react to this and understand that and decide, yes, we want these best models in Europe as well, for example. But yeah, I mean, it's unclear right now, right? Because the one thing that we can't answer is where does this top out? How far do these models go? Are they kind of on an S curve and that it will stop, or are they on an exponential curve and it will just always be? And in the latter case, it's kind of very hard to imagine how we catch up with that. So I don't know. Yeah,
I guess maybe Jonas, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Do you think we're in an S curve, or do you think that these will just keep getting better and better, and the more compute you throw at these things, will get, there's no topping out.
I don't know.
What's your best guess?
Sometimes it feels like we're in a S-curve. And code is getting generated at a rate that's increasing exponentially. And I think like GitHub is actually struggling with their infrastructure right now and trying to figure out how to deal with the influx of data that's coming in.
Interesting. I guess, Bradley, do you have a thought in terms of whether we're in an S-curve or whether this can, keep getting better, like the more compute you throw at it? Like, as you're building up, your nodes and servicing compute, like, what are your expectations here?
I also don't know. I think I'm right there with you, and I wouldn't want to speculate. So I think I'll just kind of repeat that I feel like there's a ceiling. I think from my background is in cognitive science, and I think from like a phenomenological perspective, for us as humans, I think there's only so far that it can get before it starts to matter. The devices we're using, the way we're interacting, is going to start to matter much more than actually the power of the model. That's what I personally believe, and that's what I'm liking. Like, I'm really hoping to see. That's why I was really excited when Charlie came up here and talked about the hardware that he's building and the microcontrollers he's using. I'm really excited about that, like, interaction layer and sort of the UX of how we interact with these models, because I think we're going to start in the fine tuning and the post tuning and the the prompt injection. I think all of this stuff is going to start to matter much more. I could also be completely wrong. But I guess that's my hope, because I want us to start moving away from just these kind of like frontier model overlords that we just can't wait for the next one to come out, and we're all just kind of like worshiping this incredible power, and we're start thinking, you know what, actually the kind of data that I'm feeding it's really important, and how I'm capturing that data and how I'm storing that data, or how I'm sequencing my genome and then providing that to my own local model running at home. I just think that's a much more interesting future that is more exciting for me to imagine, that like I'm having a sovereign, like an open source model that I'm running in my community or in my coffee shop or wherever it is. So I don't know.
So maybe actually on this point, I think a theme we've been talking about is a little bit about you want to maybe own your personal model. There's some platform risks perhaps. So right now, if you look at the game board right now, it seems that the U.S. and China seem to be the dominant players, and Europe is almost arguably being left behind, maybe not. So, I mean, it's very good to actually talk to people in Europe who are at the frontier of this. I'm curious, like, what is the sentiment amongst the European tech community? Do they feel like they're being left behind? Is there something that the American community is missing and Europe's actually ahead in some way? How do you think the dust settles here?
So I think the best case for Europe right now is that models are complete commodities. There's no value accrual there, and like everything happens in physical space, and like we're still kind of okay on that. But I think like otherwise, yeah, like it's a very interesting question right now. Like it is super dangerous, like otherwise, and if we're dependent on just like those two, superpowers.
So can you unpack maybe the model commoditization point for people in the crowd?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like if we think that, like, so basically the question is this, like, what does, I guess there are several questions. Like one is like, what do the models look like? Is it an S-curve? But then there's even question itself about intelligence, right? Like what does more and more intelligence mean at some point? And like, my guess would be that at some point it doesn't mean anything anymore, and like all the bottlenecks come from everything else, like everything you can do in the physical space rather than the intelligence you have. And so that kind of, I think those are big questions, and we don't really know the answers. We can only make like guesses at it and predict the futures and those different possibilities. But like, yes, if we see either of those kind of like, then we would see that, yeah, like basically we have just lots of different models in the world, we choose between them, but like all the interesting stuff happens in physical space.
I'm curious if others have an opinion about Europe's relative position, or if we should move on to another question.
The way I see Europe is we're in a unique position to do good open source. Mm-hmm. Because of our diverse cultures, there's like a richness to Europe that is interesting here. And so I think it's good for us if we have open models and yeah.
This is maybe a fun little piece of lore. It was the co-founder of Foresight Institute, Christine Peterson, who is credited for coining the term open source back in 1997 at a Foresight event. Not dissimilar, I think, to this kind of gathering, which is one of the reasons why Foresight's really excited about these kind of gatherings and thinks they're important. But just to kind of answer that question of like, when it comes to the future of open source and people that care about open source, it is not a coincidence that we decided for Berlin and this place to be the first European location for opening up one of our nodes. So we also have the one in SF and we have the one here in Berlin. We could have put the second one in New York, but we're here for a reason. So we're kind of we're staking our flag and hoping for this future.
So I'm curious on that then. So I mean, at this point to run a training run is pretty damn expensive. So the person that open sources either needs to raise a ton of money that's like effectively like a grant, or there needs to be some good economic reason too. So I'm curious, practically, is it possible to actually in Europe build a open source model? Does anybody have the economic incentive to go and run it?
From my understanding, Mistral is trying to do this, and now they're changing position, and they're focusing more on harnesses and things like that. And then it's more around the local models, so maybe training the model for specific languages that maybe the big models wouldn't really focus on. Again, back to the culture and the diversity.
I know that Sprind, Germany's innovation agency, they are offering 125 million per lab, and I think another like billion per year after that. They just closed a round on, and they have substantial resources to put towards precisely this problem. I think they're not. I don't want to speak on the details of this, but it's worth looking into because there definitely are some players with resources in Europe that are trying.
Interesting. Actually, I had no idea. I'm curious then about if people have thought about the economics surrounding open source models. What I mean by that is if someone like a Mistral decides, hey, I want to open source a model, what's in it for them? Like, are they thinking, well, I want models to be a commodity and I'll earn on the harness layer? Like, what do you think the business logic is of a decision like that? Maybe Jonas, I guess it seems like you have some insight into kind of that dynamic. I'm curious your thoughts.
So I think the game is to sell API access. I think that's where the money is. And if you build the model, then maybe it's easier for you to sell the API with it. But I don't really know the inner financial dynamics here and how it would work.
This is kind of a question back at you. How important is it then that all of the data that they're collecting from the users that are using their chat interfaces? Because this feels to me like a big reason why they're like keeping the prices low and whatnot. I don't know if you can say anything to that. If the API is the real value, but what about all of the data?
So I know that the data is not collected for. Yeah, I don't want to speak too much to this,
yeah,
but
of course, sorry.
I know that it's like security is taken really seriously. Yeah.
Do you think Anthropic might move to the EU? Is there a chance?
I don't know. I didn't speak to Dario.
It was worth asking, no? I mean, we could keep asking questions, but I have to imagine people in the audience also have questions. There's some incredible talent up here. So does anybody have? All right.
About micropayments and microtransactions. So my question is, will we first see microtransactions in Web 2, then and not in Web 3 space? Because like in Web 2 we have, let me add a bit of context. In Web 2 we have like privacy by default, we have like compliance, we have taxation, etc., etc. And as far as I understand, we have to build this stuff in, say, Tempo in Web3. So what do you guys think? Probably that So a question for Dankert.
Sorry, can you clarify, is this about, like, what do you mean by Web 2 and Web 3? Are you talking, like, do you mean by Web 2 credit cards or what?
Stripe, they acquired Bridge, obviously, but still, like, they can...
I always find it very ironic when people call banks Web 2. I mean, but anyway. Yeah, like, I don't know. I think, I mean, we will build privacy very quickly. I don't think it will take long. So, I mean, I don't know if you've seen, like, we have the Zones, like, prototype out there for Tempo. So we will get the equivalent privacy that these services can provide. Which one will come first? I think this is very hard to predict. I think it will really depend on what the breakout service categories are going to be, and I don't feel able to predict that right now.
Maybe I could take a stab at it, which is that just from the venture side, we've been seeing a lot of companies kind of thinking about micropayments and kind of just agentic payment world. And I think that a lot of people assume that stablecoins will be used for everything. But the truth is that if you look at a lot of use cases, so the agent goes and buys shoes for you, unlikely that you're using stablecoins there. And the reason is because credit cards kind of work pretty well already, at least in, in like Western countries. And the marginal benefit for stablecoins isn't necessarily there. On top of that, the way that you shop is that you oftentimes want to go look at the shoe yourself and you want to go search through it. That experience is worth your time. So even the idea that you're going to completely give away that experience to an agent to go do it, you might not even trust their judgment or their taste. So there's a whole segment of the economy that it's unclear even if agents are doing purchasing. Stablecoins make sense. The place where it does, and we're seeing a lot of adoption at least, green shoots, is that what you said before is with APIs, where a lot of these APIs realize that, well, who is our marginal buyer? It's no longer humans going and getting into apps, it's agents. And when you do that, you slowly realize that you need to begin charging a volume fee over your service. You can no longer charge seats the way that SaaS products usually used to charge seats. It changes the business model. You don't just sell your services to a company, but you do it on a per usage business model. And when that happens, you start realizing, well, I can just expose this to the world, right? If it's per usage, I don't really care who's using it. And then you look around at what are the payment solutions, and it turns out the only true global payment solution that works and is cheap is stablecoins. So a lot of APIs are naturally arriving at this point of like, oh my God, this is even Web 2 APIs. We need to just have a stablecoin front end or stablecoin payment infrastructure so that people globally could buy data from us. And it turns out to be a very clean solution that just kind of flows naturally from this change in business model and a desire to sell data globally, which is quite interesting. Any other questions from the audience?
Relating to the Erdős conjecture that was proved by OpenAI model, people speculated, or I saw some claims that say that improving mathematical abilities of the model is expected, and they expected to improve significantly the capabilities of the model in many other areas. Do you agree with this?
So your question is, the conjecture was that by improving the mathematical skills of the model, it would translate to the improvement in other areas. Is that correct? Unfortunately, I'm not a model researcher. I do mostly infrastructure.
Maybe on that, I'm just actually curious. What are the hardest infrastructure problems today? I feel like infrastructure problems as it relates to AI get like less attention because they're like less of like sexy problems to the everyday engineer, right? People want to know like, oh, new model architecture, all that stuff. What's like the frontier of infrastructure questions today? What are the big questions keeping researchers up? What are the, the big unlocks that are here to come?
What is public? I think it's pretty obvious that with more code, you get more pressure on your infrastructure. So you need to rethink how you're handling your data like especially around code, how you shift it around. So that's the type of infrastructure that I'm thinking of.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, as you have more independent agents that start writing code, now you actually create pressure in the system, and you have to improve like the efficiency of the whole system, right?
So can we have like a concrete example? So like if you're, like what's an example and where does the stress appear on the system?
It could be on the CI infrastructure, for example. It could be on the Git hosting. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, any other big questions from the audience? Okay, so I take it as we've answered all the questions you guys have about AI. Well, anyways, thank you guys all for coming to the panel, and I'm sure everyone will stick around after to answer any of your lesser questions.